Do you want to sleep? Then listen to me. Turn off the lights, close the windows, now close them and listen to you. Finally, I will make a request to you. Put down your phone and listen to my voice. Listen clearly. I will now tell you a story that will make you sleepy. Close your eyes and listen carefully to my words.
Thomas of Ercilden in Lauderdale, called the Rhymer on account of his producing a poetical romance on the subject of Tristram and Iseult, which is curious as the earliest specimen of English verse known to exist, flourished in the reign of Alexander III of Scotland. Like other men of talent of the period, Thomas was suspected of magic. He was also said to have the gift of prophecy, which was accounted for in the following peculiar manner, referring entirely to the Elfin superstition. As Thomas lay on Huntley Bank, a place on the descent of the Eildon Hills, which raise their triple crest above the celebrated monastery of Melrose, he saw a lady so extremely beautiful that he imagined she must be the Virgin Mary herself. Her appointments, however, were those rather of an Amazon or goddess of the woods. Her steed was of the highest beauty, and at its mane hung 30 silver bells in 9, which were music to the wind as she paced along. Her saddle was of royal bone, ivory, laid over with orfevrerie, goldsmith's work. Her stirrups, her dress, all corresponded with her extreme beauty and the magnificence of her array. The fair huntress had her bow in hand, and her arrows at her belt. She led 3 greyhounds in a leash, and 3 raches, or hounds of scent, followed her closely. She rejected and disclaimed the homage which Thomas desired to pay her, so that, passing from one extremity to the other, Thomas became as bold as he had at first been humble. The lady warned him he must become her slave if he wished to prosecute his suit. Before their interview terminated, the appearance of the beautiful lady was changed into that of the most hideous hag in existence. A witch from the spittle or almshouse would have been a goddess in comparison to the late beautiful huntress. Hideous as she was, Thomas felt that he had placed himself in the power of this hag, and when she bade him take leave of the sun and of the leaf that grew on the tree, he felt himself under the necessity of obeying her. A cavern received them, in which, following his frightful guide, he for 3 days traveled in darkness, sometimes hearing the booming of a distant ocean, sometimes walking through rivers of blood which crossed their subterranean path. At length they emerged into daylight in a most beautiful orchard. Thomas, almost fainting for want of food, stretched out his hand towards the goodly fruit which hung around him, but was forbidden by his conductress, who informed him that these were the fatal apples which were the cause of the fall of man. He perceived also that his guide had no sooner entered this mysterious ground and breathed its magic air than she was revived in beauty, equipage, and splendor, as fair or fairer than he had first seen her on the mountain. Then she proceeded to explain to him the character of the country. Yonder right-hand path, she says, conveys the spirits of the blessed to paradise. Yon downward and well-worn way leads sinful souls to the place of everlasting punishment. The third road by yonder dark break conducts to the milder place of pain, from which prayer and mass may release offenders. But see you yet a 4th road sweeping along the plain to yonder splendid castle? Yonder is the road to Elfland, to which we are now bound. The lord of the castle is king of the country, and I am his queen. And when we enter yonder castle, you must observe strict silence and answer no question that is asked you, and I will account for your silence by saying I took your speech when I brought you from Middle-earth. Having thus instructed him, they journeyed on to the castle, and entering by the kitchen, found themselves in the midst of such a festive scene as might become the mansion of a great feudal lord or prince. 30 carcasses of deer were lying on the massive kitchen board under the hands of numerous cooks who toiled to cut them up and dress them, while the gigantic greyhounds which had taken the spoil lay lapping the blood and enjoying the sight of the slain game. They came next to the royal hall, where the king received his loving consort. Knights and ladies, dancing by threes, occupied the floor of the hall, and Thomas, the fatigue of his journey from the Eildon Hills forgotten, went forward and joined in the revelry. After a period, however, which seemed to him a very short one, the queen spoke with him apart and bade him prepare to return to his own country. "Now," said the queen, "how long think you that you have been here?" "Certes, fair lady," answered Thomas, "not above these 7 days." "You are deceived," answered the queen. "You have been 7 years in this castle, and it is full time you were gone. Know, Thomas, that the arch-fiend will come to this castle tomorrow to demand his tribute, and so handsome a man as you will attract his eye. For all the world would I not suffer you to be betrayed to such a fate. Therefore, up and let us be going." This terrible news reconciled Thomas to his departure from Elfland, and the queen was not long in placing him upon Huntley Bank, where the birds were singing. She took leave of him, and to ensure his reputation, bestowed on him the tongue which could not lie. Thomas in vain objected to this inconvenient and involuntary adhesion to veracity, which would make him, as he thought, unfit for church or for market, for king's court or for lady's bower. But all his remonstrances were disregarded by the lady, and Thomas the Rhymer, whenever the discourse turned on the future, gained the credit of a prophet, whether he would or not, for he could say nothing but what was sure to come to pass. Thomas remained several years in his own tower near Eildstown, and enjoyed the fame of his predictions, several of which are current among the country people to this day. At length, as the prophet was entertaining the Earl of March in his dwelling, a cry of astonishment arose in the village on the appearance of a hart and hind, which left the forest and, contrary to their shy nature, came quietly onward, traversing the village towards the dwelling of Thomas. The prophet instantly rose from the board, and acknowledging the prodigy as the summons of his fate, he accompanied the hart and hind into the forest, and though occasionally seen by individuals to whom he has chosen to show himself, he has never again mixed familiarly with mankind. It is a good thing to befriend the fairies, as the following stories show. There have been from time immemorial at Hawick, during the 2 or 3 last weeks of the year, markets once a week for the disposal of sheep for slaughter, at which the greater number of people, both in the middle and poorer classes of life, had been accustomed to provide themselves with their marts. A poor man from Jedburgh, who was on his way to Hawick for the purpose of attending one of these markets, as he was passing over that side of Rubislaw, which is nearest the Teviot, was suddenly alarmed by a frightful and unaccountable noise. The sound, as he supposed, proceeded from an immense number of female voices, but no objects whence it could come were visible. Amidst howling and wailing were mixed shouts of mirth and jollity, but he could gather nothing articulate except the following words: "Oh, there's a bairn born, but there's nothing to pit on it." The occasion of this elfish concert, it seemed, was the birth of a fairy child, at which the fairies, with the exception of 2 or 3 who were discomposed at having nothing to cover the little innocent with, were enjoying themselves with that joviality usually characteristic of such an event. The astonished rustic, finding himself amongst a host of invisible beings in a wild moorland place, and far from any human assistance, should assistance be required, full of the greatest consternation, immediately on hearing this expression, again and again vociferated, stripped off his plaid, and threw it on the ground. It was instantly snatched up by an invisible hand, and the wailings immediately ceased, but the shouts of mirth were continued with increased vigor. Being of opinion that what he had done had satisfied his invisible friends, he lost no time in making off and proceeded on his road to Hawick, musing on his singular adventure. He purchased a sheep, which turned out a remarkably good bargain, and returned to Jedburgh. He had no cause to regret his generosity in bestowing his plaid on the fairies, for every day afterwards his wealth multiplied, and he continued till the day of his death a rich and prosperous man. About the beginning of harvest, there having been a want of meal for shearers' bread in the farmhouse of Bedrule, a small quantity of barley, being all that was yet ripe, was cut down and converted into meal. Mrs. Buckham, the farmer's wife, rose early in the morning to bake the bread, and while she was engaged in baking, a little woman in green costume came in, and with much politeness asked for a loan of a capful of meal. Mrs. Buckham thought it prudent to comply with her request. In a short time afterwards, the woman in green returned with an equal quantity of meal, which Mrs. Buckham put in the meal ark. This meal had such a lasting quality that from it alone the good wife of Bedrule baked as much bread as served her own family and the reapers throughout the harvest, and when harvest was over, it was not exhausted. Late one night, as my granduncle, Lachlan Dew Macpherson, who was well known as the best fiddler of his day, was returning home from a ball at which he had acted as a musician, he had occasion to pass through the once haunted bog of Torrens. Now it happened at that time that the bog was frequented by a huge bogle or ghost, who was of a most mischievous disposition, and took particular pleasure in abusing every traveler who had occasion to pass through the place betwixt the twilight at night and cock-crowing in the morning. Suspecting much that he would also come in for a share of his abuse, my granduncle made up his mind in the course of his progress to return the ghost any civilities which he might think meet to offer him. On arriving on the spot, he found his suspicions were too well grounded, for whom did he see but the ghost of Bogandoran apparently ready waiting him, and seeming by his ghastly grin not a little overjoyed at the meeting. Marching up to my granduncle, the bogle clapped a huge club into his hand, and furnishing himself with one of the same dimensions, he put a spittle in his hand and deliberately commenced the combat. My granduncle returned the salute with equal spirit, and so ably did both parties ply their batons that for a while the issue of the combat was extremely doubtful. At length, however, the fiddler could easily discover that his opponent's vigor was much in the fagging order. Picking up renewed courage in consequence, he plied the ghost with renewed force, and after a stout resistance, in the course of which both parties were seriously handled, the ghost of Bogandoran thought it prudent to give up the night. At the same time, filled no doubt with great indignation at this signal defeat, it seems the ghost resolved to re-engage my granduncle on some other occasion, under more favorable circumstances. Not long after, as my granduncle was returning home quite unattended from another ball in the braes of the country, he had just entered the hollow of Aldecorish, well known for its eerie properties, when lo, who presented himself to his view on the adjacent eminence but his old friend of Bogandoran, advancing as large as the gable of a house and putting himself in the most threatening and fighting attitudes. Looking at the very dangerous nature of the ground where they had met, and feeling no anxiety for a second encounter with a combatant of his weight in a situation so little desirable, the fiddler would have willingly deferred the settlement of their differences till a more convenient season. He, accordingly, assuming the most submissive aspect in the world, endeavored to pass by his champion in peace, but in vain. Longing, no doubt, to retrieve the disgrace of his late discomfiture, the bogle instantly seized the fiddler and attempted with all his might to pull the latter down the precipice with the diabolical intention, it is supposed, of drowning him in the river Avon below. In this pious design, the bogle was happily frustrated by the intervention of some trees which grew on the precipice, and to which my unhappy granduncle clung with the zeal of a drowning man. The enraged ghost, finding it impossible to extricate him from those friendly trees, and resolving at all events to be revenged upon him, fell upon maltreating the fiddler with his hands and feet in the most inhuman manner. Such gross indignities my worthy granduncle was not accustomed to, and being incensed beyond all measure at the liberties taken by Bogandoran, he resolved again to try his mettle, whether life or death should be the consequence. Having no other weapon wherewith to defend himself but his beodag, which, considering the nature of his opponent's constitution, he suspected much would be of little avail to him, I say, in the absence of any other weapon, he sheathed the beodag 3 times in the ghost of Bogandoran's body. And what was the consequence? Why, to the great astonishment of my courageous forefather, the ghost fell down cold dead at his feet, and was never more seen or heard of.